I'm Kenneth Maxwell, and I live at 1720 Wren Street, Georgetown, South Carolina. And I was in the Air Corps. I was signed up for my registration for the draft, and I had a physical, and I had a torn up ligament in my left knee, and I had a hernia in my stomach, and I had a heart murmur, so I know I wasn't going into combat. And when I went to Camp Grant, they said that we could have a choice between the Air Corps and the Signal Corps as far as where we served. So everybody went to the Air Corps. We went down to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and it was raining cats and dogs when we got down there, and we had a wool overcoat, and we were carrying our duffel bags, and we had to walk about a mile in that. We were drowned practically. We got there, they fed us, and then they assigned us to tents, and it was one heck of a night, I tell you that. Then later on, when we were in tents, and this was in March, one morning we woke up, there was 3 inches of snow in the tent. It was cold out there. And later, when we graduated, it was, we were wearing wools, and we went on a parade for the graduation. There was must be 30,000 troops or something like that in the parade. And I can remember it was hot. I mean, we were in full wools, you know, jackets and everything else. It was 90+ degrees there. They were just falling out right and left. So we probably lost, we were 12 by 12, and we probably lost 40, 50 people in each one of those. Ambulance was just running back and forth picking up guys. As we were walking out, we went by the hospital. The veranda was completely full of bodies or live soldiers laying there. And also the lawn had about, I don't know, a couple of hundred people laying out there in the lawn too. So I was asked where I wanted to go, and they said, well, I had a chance to go to Miami Beach. And they said they were forming a cadre there, and with my experience, I'd probably get rapid advancement. Also, the food in the hotel would be just about as good as you could get. They said, you won't get a better place. And I said, now when I get home, after the war, what am I going to tell everybody? I spent all my time in Hawaii and Miami Beach. So I said, what else you got? And they said, well, we have uncommitted area. So I went off, and we got in a train the next morning. We were headed west, and we went for 5 days going west to San Francisco. And there were 5 trains, and I'd worked for Pullman Standard Car, and I knew they had some cars out there in the tracks that they'd probably had before World War I, because the windows were open and you could close the windows and all that. And the trains or locomotives were resurrected because my dad was a railroad engineer, and I knew what type he was running. And we came to the mountains. They couldn't, the train, we had 4 or 5 Pullmans on each train. There was 4 or 5 trains there. They couldn't make it up the hill, so they disconnected the train behind us to push us over the hill. And every one of them did the same thing till we got over the hill. But that's what took us 5 days to get out to San Francisco. We missed the convoy, so they put us on Angel Island, which is the next rock above Alcatraz. We spent about 3 or 4 weeks there. Then we caught the next convoy going over to Hawaii. And when we got to Hawaii, we were on the southeast corner near Bellows Field, and we were right on the beach. Behind us was a cane field, and right in front of us was the ocean. And one morning they got us out, and we noticed that there was a ditcher or a trencher running along the dunes, and they gave us Model 17 Enfield rifles, the British model, and they said clean them up, and we cleaned them up, and we took 5 shots out in the ocean, and they said, well, if the Japs break through at Midway, you'll defend this. And one of the fellows said, what do we do about bayonets? And the captain was talking to us while he said, when the Air Corps starts fighting with bayonets, it's time we lost this war. So later on, I was assigned to the forward echelon of the 7th Air Force, which is the cave up in the hills, because it was a safe site in case they something happened to the site downtown, why that would be the main base for the 7th Air Force as far as the generals were concerned. We were given all the data at night. I worked from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. And they told us where every airplane was every night, the type it was, like a bomber or fighter and all that, where it was located and what its condition was it available for fighting. And we were in the Army about 4 months and they were giving us all this information. Then later on, in the evening, the Navy would call us and give us their picket ships where they were located off the mouth of Hawaii, or the Pearl Harbor. And so we knew more information, we knew what to do with. So later on, about a month or so, well, maybe 6 weeks, 2 months later, I was given a chance to go to work in a general's office, and he was head of the Air Force, 7th Air Force Base Command. And I was a stenographer, and we also took the phone calls that he got in and sent out, and we listened to every one of them, and we logged the time, who it was from, and what the gist of the matter was. And one time, he asked me to call 2 colonels that were head of the bases up in the north end of the island. And I said, okay, and I dialed one of them, and I listened in to a conversation that 2 colonels were talking. And they were the colonels the general wanted to talk to. So I told the general, well, I asked the colonels, I said, okay, if I break in here and tell you that General Farthing wants to talk to you? And they said, yeah, go ahead, put him on. So I called the general, and they discussed their matters then, but I was wondering if in case some foreigner ever got a hold of that and they were talking, they could listen to the general and 2 other colonels on the bases. My duties at the working for the general were, if they had a board of inquiry set up, such as an airplane accident or an airplane missing or sometimes personnel matters, I sat in on the board of inquiry and recorded it and wrote up the minutes. And we did lose quite a few planes. They were coming in from the States, and I remember one with a B-25 group came in to Hickam, and usually after they checked the engines out, they flew around the island a little. And I was sitting in on this board of inquiry, and they said a P-40 pilot who had 3 of them behind him went into a rather steep dive and pulled out, and he looked back to see if his other 3 boys were with him, and they were. He saw this B-25 tag in on the end of it, making a dive. When he pulled out, the wings came off. So another time why an airplane came in, he was coming from the States to Hickam, and he was hitting headwinds, strong headwinds. So he went down low to see if he could get underneath it. He couldn't. He went way up and he couldn't get it there, so he came back down. He ran out of gas. He was running out of gas when he was calling. Bellows Field happened to be on the southeast corner, which was the closest one. And he had lost 2 engines when he called in and said that, you know, he had to come in high, so make sure if the others quit, he could glide in. The plane overshot the field and went off at the end, cracked up and killed the gas tubes in the back, gasoline tubes, broke and sprayed them, burned up. So it's just that type of thing that I recorded. Later on, they set up the Air Transport Command over there, and a major came in. He was a reserve officer. He was an airline pilot. And he and I were the advanced party, you might say, for the Air Transport Command. And he went to the general from the 7th Air Force and asked if he could, you know, acquire some of the personnel before our group came in. They said, yeah. So the letter went out to all Air Force Command in Hickam, or in Hawaii, that, you know, any persons that can be transferred to the Air Transport Command. And we never got so many 8 balls in your life. I mean, everybody, you can imagine yourself being a commander saying, man, here's what we get, but all of our gold bricks, goof-offs and everything else. So as time went on, every one of them was being, court-martialed, but we had an alternative. We had the islands down below, like Canton Island was an atoll with, say, like that, with a strip running along one edge of it, and Christmas Island was the same way. So all we say, well, you want to spend a year down there, or do you want to obey the commands that you were given? So most of them took the commands. He was in charge of the Air Transport Command contingency at Hickam. I mean, he was in charge of Hickam Field, but he was in charge of the Air Transport Command. I worked for him as a stenographer, but he didn't have enough work to keep me busy. So after I was there about, I think it was a year and a half in Hawaii, I got tired. I mean, I was bored. And I said, well, out this far, I might as well see the rest of the South Pacific. So I asked him about transferring to one of the islands, not Canton or Christmas, but one of the islands. And he said, well, if you get yourself a replacement. So I got a replacement, and I got a transfer to Samoa, American Samoa at Tutuila, the island of Tutuila. And Pango Pango was in that group. And we flew down from Hickam to Penryn Island. It's just a little off island out there. And then the next day we went into Samoa. I forgot, it was a Marine Air Group 13, I think, that we were attached to there. So we went there. It was a beautiful island. Everything is green, but it was very humid, and we had fungus all over the place. I mean, you couldn't put your shoes out at night without next morning being green. And so I was down there about a month, and they called me back, and they said that they were opening John Rogers Airport, and the stenographer that had replaced me went over there. So they said, you can be the stenographer until the WWII get here. The WWII were coming over in a month or so. But they gave us, everybody got a 1 rank increase. So I went from a staff to a tech sergeant then. And after the WWII came in, I went down to New Caledonia. And we flew from Hickam to Canton to Fiji Islands to New Caledonia. And the place was called Plains de Gaiac, the Plains of the Gaiac Tree. And I was there. They had lost, I was attached to the legal officer, and they had lost a plane that was carrying some highly secret material. And the material was drifting in off of the ocean into the shore. So they took a door off of Piper Club, and we flew up and down the coast there trying to locate material that could have been used. And one other thing happened there. They had a milk run from Guadalcanal to New Hebrides to New Caledonia to New Zealand. And sometimes they didn't have anything coming back, so they loaded a plane one time with full of New Zealand beer, cases. The case was 48 quart. A New Zealand quart was three quarts made one of our gallons. And they said everybody, 2 people could get a case. Well, you found somebody that didn't have a drinking beer problem. Well, you got whole 48 bottles, and then you put them under your bunk. So later on, the Inspector General came by, and when they start an airplane up, they have fire extinguishers there in case of a backfire and firing the plane. So after he watched them come out, they put the fire extinguishers out, and then the plane got cranked up and they took off. And he asked the fellow, he said, is that fire extinguisher loaded? He said, oh yeah. He said, show me, and it was empty. So he went to the other guy and he says, is that fire extinguisher loaded? Yep, it was empty. Went and checked all the reserve units. Everyone was empty. The boys have been cooling their beer with the CO2 coolers. So later on, a letter came through that the CO at Guadalcanal wanted a stenographer. So I wrote and asked him, if I was a tech sergeant, would he accept it? And he said, yeah, come on up. So I flew from New Cal to New Hebrides to Guadalcanal. I worked up there for about 3 months, I guess it was. But there was a staff sergeant pilot there, and he had a crew. His first lieutenant was his co-pilot. His second lieutenant was his navigator, and he had a master sergeant, was his aerial engineer and radio operator. So he outranked, everybody outranked him, but when he was flying, he outranked everybody. So he was an alcoholic, and when I was there a little while, I said, Maxwell, we need a non-commissioned officers club. So he said, see if you can get the Quonset hunt from the CO. So I did, and he said, okay. So we said, well, we're going to have to move it. So he got a couple of bottles of whiskey, and we went to the Seabees, and he got the low boys and stuff to lift up the Quonset hunt. We moved it. The Officers Club had 200 cases of beer that we traded 200 cases of soft drinks for. So we got our beer, we had our NCO club, but we didn't have any way to cool the beer. So he got, I think, scrounged up about three bottles of whiskey, and we went to the Marines supply, and there was a master sergeant there, and we got an air conditioner unit for the 3 bottles, and we put them in our Quonset, and we had cool beer. But about that time, a colonel from Nadzab, New Guinea called and said, hey, he needed a stenographer. So I asked, and I flew over there. Now, when we were flying out of Guadalcanal, it was beautiful. I mean, you could see the islands and everything. And then we ran into a front. And I mean, everybody else, by the way, on that plane, it was about 30 of us, was a pilot. They were transferring the pilots down. And I was the only other one. I got sicker than a dog. You could look, it was a B-24 converted. The wings were just flapping out there. The tail rudders were just flapping like that. Water was running down the aisle. It was a mess. But anyway, we got into into Nadzab. And Nadzab base was down on the, well, almost at sea level. And it was hot and humid there. But our headquarters was up on a ridge top. And that ridge was cool. I mean, we had a wind blowing through all the time. And they got their water from a river coming out of the mountains about a mile away. And that pipe was exposed the whole way, so it got hot. And the water was hot, so if you wanted a hot shower, you took it after about lunchtime, and you had a hot shower. And none of the other places had hot showers, by the way. So, and then I was there about 2 months, I guess it was, and the order came through to rotate everybody over 18 months. And I had at the time about 28 months overseas. So I had my name at the top, and the next fellow down, I think, was 24 months, and everybody else was 18 months. So we wrote the letter up, sent it up to headquarters, and I told the colonel I was working for, I said, I've never been on a furlough. I said, can I get one to Australia? And he said, yeah, go ahead. So I went down to Australia. Now, well, I had myself off manifested at each station going down. Well, when I got to Brisbane, the staff sergeant pilot, the alcoholic, was there. I mean, he had failed his physical, so I saw him one night. We were out drinking beer, and we were drinking Aussie beer, which is pretty potent stuff. And I had drank 2 bottles of this, you know, it's 3 to a quart, 3 quarts to a gallon of our, so I had 2 of them. I went out to the head. There was a bulb out there, I know, and I saw 2 of them up there, and I said, well, time to go home. And the fellows that were drinking with us said that that staff sergeant pilot drank 5 of those quarts that night. So you can see he was well. Anyway, I went on to Sydney to spend some time down there. It was between, say it was like October here, it'd be, well, it'd stay just about like October here, getting colder, but not real cold. And when I got back from Australia, the letter had come back from allocation of the rotation of all the people that were going back, except my name wasn't on it. And I said, so I asked the colonel if he would sign a letter saying, what the hell happened here? And so I sent the letter, and after about 3 weeks, I got a letter back saying, rotate Maxwell back to the States. In the meantime, well, and New Guinea is shaped about like that. I was down here, and they had transferred the terminus to the end. It was a Biak Island up in the very corner there. So to get home, I had to fly from here to Hollandia, to Biak Island to fly back east. So when I went to Landia, I asked the guys up there, I said, what happened to my records? They said, well, we were getting ready to go to the Philippines, so all the records were aboard ship. So you had to find out what ship they were on, what hold they were on, where it was parked and all that. And then they had to go through all the records to find mine. They finally found it. And I said, what if they hadn't? They said, well, you might still be out here. So anyway, I got to Biak the next day. Oh yeah, by the way, when I was in Hawaii, I was in quarters with a master sergeant who was the general's aerial engineer. And whenever he would say go on a trip, well, he'd get a box of 45s, and when he came back, he'd give me those, and I'd go down to the police station and shoot them up, and he'd deaf as hell after that. Anyway, he was down there in permanent KP, and I said, what the heck happened to you? And he said, well, they were flying somewhere over the East Coast, and he said one of the cowlings of the motor came off, and that B-24 converted had two rudders like this, and it just missed one of the rudders as it flew by. And he said when they landed, he was a private on his way to New Guinea as permanent KP. So anyway, when I got back, I had a 30-day furlough. Went to Illinois, and they had snow up there and 5-10 degree. I went out hunting one morning, and the firing pin froze in my shotgun, so it was cold. I got back to the California Hamilton Field, right above San Francisco, and they assigned me to the Judge Advocate General's office there. They had a lot of AWOL cases as far as, people that had gone over their time, and also some desertion charges and all that, but they didn't have any court reporters. They had all these trials backed up. They said, Maxwell, you're going to be our court reporter. And I said, well, I'm not that fast. They said, you're going to be. So I was the court reporter then, and I did that. I used to get, I think it was 25 cents for 100 words or something like that. And so I made a little extra money on the deal too. So, and then, about May or June, I bought me a motorcycle, and I traveled around that area. And I had, when the war ended, I had, not quite enough to immediately get discharged, but for a couple of weeks later. So I rode my motorcycle down to March Field at Los Angeles, and I was discharged on November the 9th, I think it was, and rode the motorcycle home. So that was my experience. When I came back, the colonel I was had been working for, said, you won't stay here very long because they're bringing WACs in. Well, the WAC that took over was a master sergeant to replace me, and so she took over my job after I was there about 2 weeks, and then they sent me down. But I was amazed. The only other WACs we ever heard of were at Hollandia at General MacArthur's office. I enjoyed my time in the Army. I mean, I didn't have any, you might say, great problems or anything, and I just got bored being in Hawaii. I mean, they're just a little island, and you get tired of driving around the island there. So, no, I really don't have any problems that I could think of. Well, one thing, when we were going over on the ship, we hit the groundswell out of San Francisco. The ship was going up and down like that. And they had us in guard duty, and I was up in the top deck on the back, and I was getting sicker than a dog up there. Anyway, the officer of the day came by, and I saluted him by hand. I had a rifle, but he said, what about rifle salute, soldier? And I said, it rained the day we had to learn about a rifle, so I never had any rifle training, sir. So they put us on KP. There was 200 of us in cabins from the Air Force, and the rest of our Air Corps, and the rest of the troops were in the hold. So we had pretty good conditions as far as living there. But one thing about being on KP, we didn't have any cooks. And when we went aboard, they said, anybody's a cook? Anybody ever worked in a restaurant? No, well, you are our cooks then, and that, you can imagine the food we got. So it was about, oh, I've forgotten, later in the evening after we cleaned up, we would go into it was a civilian crew, so we would go over there and ask them if they could spare a little food. They usually set us down and gave us a meal so we could eat a little better anyway. There was one fella that, he was I believe in a Major League Baseball team with one, and he had money, so our cabin was right across from the officer's kitchen, so he paid some, I forgot, steward, I guess they'd call him, to bring his dinner in to him. And so every day he'd get his dinner served in there. And he paid the fellow, of course, but we had a good, I mean, once we were past that groundswell at San Francisco, it was smooth going, it was beautiful then. Generally, I was working for a general or a colonel, full colonel, and stuff like that. So you don't hit many bad ones at that level. I mean, most of them are the lieutenants and first lieutenants, and you might say the 8-balls you got in on that. And no, I couldn't complain about the train. Well, one time when I was down in Australia, I said, I wanted to get off manifested to go back to Brisbane to see that Staff Sergeant Pilot, the alcoholic, say goodbye to him. And one of the fellows said, I can't do that. And I said, yeah, hell, I've been doing it all the way down. And he said, we can't do it. And one of these second lieutenants came up and said, what's the matter here? And he said, that guy wants to be offloaded. And he said, nope, all the way. So I considered him an 8-ball. It was a learning chance. I mean, I never had a chance to go out in the Pacific before, and so that was one of the reasons I wanted to go down to the islands to see what it was like. And I was bored up in Hawaii, so I said, might as well go down and see what it's like. And it was interesting. Well, the stenographers were scarcer than hen's teeth, and that's one of the reasons I got to go around. I mean, nobody had a stenographer, so they'd say, hey, I got a lot of correspondence here, so I need a stenographer. Well, that was me. They had that 5220 club after the war, so I tried to get on that, but they keep sending me out on jobs. I mean, if you're a male stenographer, man, the jobs were all over the place. So I worked as a stenographer at Pullman Standard Car before the war, so I went back there for about 3 or 4 months. But before the war, they didn't have all the taxes that they had later on, and I was still only making, well, I think it was making $1 an hour after the war, and I was only getting $30-some for a week's work. So I said, well, the heck with this. So I went to work for several other people. I was waiting to get into college. College at those days were full, and I was trying to get in an Illinois Institute of Technology. And they said, well, it'd be, I think it was 1947, the spring term, that I could get in. So I got in there. But they said to get out of there if you weren't a genius in math, and I was no genius in math. So I took an aptitude test, and they suggested outdoor work, like agronomist or a forester or something like that. So I decided to become or try a forester. So the New York College of Forestry was one of the higher rated ones in Syracuse, I believe it was. So I went to there on my motorcycle, and they said they weren't taking anybody but out-of-state students that were less than A average. So I said, well, mine weren't anywhere near that. They said I could go to school at upstate New York at a Paul Smith's college up there, establish residence, and then finish up down there. Well, I went to Paul Smith's. That winter it got 42 below one time, and it was 40 below several times, and generally it would be 25 to 30 below, and you know, the cold snaps coming through. So I said, they don't grow trees up there. They had 40-year-old trees were about 6 inches in diameter. So I said, I made an application to the University of Florida, and I went to the University of Florida then. And I graduated down there in forestry in 1950, and then I graduated again in 1951 with a degree in agriculture and a major in soils. Another fellow and I, after we got out, it was June, and we said, well, we followed the regular program. We would get out, get a job, we would buy a car, we would get married, we raised 3 kids. When we retired at 65, we would go out west. So we said, let's change that around. So we went out west from there. We took about 6 months. And we went out to Kansas, worked in the wheat fields in Oklahoma and Kansas. Then we went out through all the national parks and up to Lake Louise and Banff and out to the west coast. And we were going to see about picking apples in Wenatchee, I believe it was. And they said we were 2 or 3 weeks early. So this fella, his father had been in the Navy, and he had friends all over the country. So he said, let's run up and see one of the fellow's daughters that his dad had worked with, who was up there at, just below the border. Can't think of the name of the town now, or city. Anyway, we went up there and we talked with the woman and the family and all that, and they asked us what we were going to do, and we said we were going to go out and pick apples. And her husband was manager or plant manager of a concrete, what do they call that? Was it Portland Cement?
Yeah.
Well, he managed one of those places, and he said, well, if you want a job, I'll give you a job, and you can stay here. And so he got a job, and we worked there for about 6 weeks, I guess it was. He took us salmon fishing there a couple of times. We caught salmon, 8-pound salmon, and I nice enjoyed that. When we left, we went down to hit all the national parks going down to San Diego, and we stopped off and saw the redwoods and all that. I put an application in for the Federal Forest Service, and they gave me positions, that I could, if I wanted to accept one. And one of them was out there in California, way back up in the hills. And they had a 30,000 acre fire up in there a year or so before that. So we went up through that area, and I guess the forester came in about once every 2 or 3 weeks to get supplies, and then he went back up there and he was by himself. So I said, that ain't for me. So we went down, and this fellow's that I was with, his father had worked with a fellow, his daughter was down at San Diego, and she was married to a, let's see, I think he was a lieutenant, and he was aboard a destroyer. So we spent about 3 weeks down there, and we said, well, now it was getting towards fall, we can see about getting a job down here or going home, so we decided to go home. So then I went to work for International Paper Company, and I think it was January of 42. No, 52.
Yeah.
And
After
right. And so I worked as a forester for, I think it was 31, 32 years for International Paper. Excuse me. And I was stationed we were cruising timber for about a year, I think it was, on the road all the time. And then I was stationed at Gainesville as a timber marker for International Paper.
Gainesville, Florida.
Yeah, Gainesville, Florida. I went to university there too. Mm-hmm. And so then I was promoted into, I guess they call them check cruisers, where whenever we went out on a cruise, say a big cruise, 30, 40, 50,000 acres, the cruisers aren't all accurate as, 100%. So a check cruiser would go out and check different spots that they had cruised and then compare his with theirs and then form, say, was he up to 75% or 80% or 90% of what I got? And that way we could correct the cruise to what it should have been, as far as if they cruised 100%. So I did that job for a while, and then they were opening, International Paper Company had a research forest set up at Bainbridge, Georgia. And I was transferred up there, and I was working there for, I think it was 6 years. It was a former shooting plantation, so we had all kinds of good hunting. And I was doing research up there on various types of site preparation and fertilization and things like that. And then I was assigned to New Bern, North Carolina as a district forester. Then I was transferred down to Georgetown, and that was 1968, I believe it was, and I've been working here. I retired 24 years ago in 1984, and that's it.